Digestive system with Crazy Kraus. Digestive system. It does two basic things. It provides nutrients. Well, really one basic thing. It provides nutrients, raw materials, carbs, proteins, lipids that cells then can utilize to do two different things. One is to make energy through cellular respiration, and the other is to take the broken down parts of carbs, proteins, and lipids, that would be monosaccharides, amino acids, and fatty acids, and make bigger molecules with it, especially proteins through the process of protein synthesis, things like insulin and glucagon. The DS or digestive system has, rule of twos, has two divisions. It's got an alimentary canal or a GI tract running from mouth to anus, and then it's got 6 accessory organs that augment or supplement the function of that GI tract. The nutrients, I've mentioned a couple times already, carbohydrates, that's starches, sugars, things like bread, pasta, spaghetti, proteins, both animal and vegetable proteins, proteins in a lot of vegetables, legumes, and obviously in fish and chicken, beef, pork, meat, and then fats you find in meats and cheeses, dairy products. So those are the 3 basic nutrients, carbs, proteins, and lipids, and they are broken down both mechanically, chewing, and chemically, salivary amylase, salivary enzymes, pancreatic digestive enzymes, hydrochloric acid in the stomach, proteases in the stomach. There are phases of swallowing, voluntary phase, where that bunch of food that we're ready to swallow, we've chewed up, mix the salivary juices with it. It's called a bolus, B-O-L-U-S. That gets swallowed in the voluntary phase. Pharyngeal phase, the bolus moves into the oropharynx. The esophagus covers the laryngeal opening so it doesn't go down into the trachea and the lungs. That's bad. Bolus goes into the esophagus, and then the esophageal phase, where there's peristaltic contractions in the esophagus, forcing that bolus of food, partially digested food, down into the stomach. So voluntary phase, where the bolus is pushed by the tongue against the hard palate toward the oropharynx. Pharyngeal phase, pharynx moves into the oropharynx, and then esophageal phase, where it is moved down the esophagus and into the stomach. You need to know about gastric pits and the 3 types of cells in the gastric pits and what they produce. Mucous neck cells produce mucus. That's why they're called mucous neck cells. Parietal cells, which produce intrinsic factor, which is necessary. It's necessary for the production of normal red blood cells. Intrinsic factor of Castle, found in liver, for instance. They also produce hydrochloric acid. So those parietal cells produce hydrochloric acid, and then the chief cells that produce pepsinogen, which is a precursor of pepsin, a protease that digests proteins. And the hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells mixes with the pepsinogen, and that creates the protease that digests the proteins. And I remember chief cells produce pepsinogen because our daughter went to the University of Illinois, the Fighting Illini, and their old mascot, Chief Illini, used to dance during halftime and before the games, football games, basketball games. Anyway, in full headdress, and I see him drinking 2 liters of Pepsi. So the chief drinks Pepsi. Chief cells produce pepsinogen. Hopefully that helps you a little bit. Regulation of digestion in the stomach, there are 3 phases: cephalic, which really, that's cephalic up here. It gets the juices flowing when we smell something or see something that looks really good, smell some food cooking. And then there's gastric, initiated when the stomach receives the food, causes a release of gastrin, which is a paracrine, a local, not an endocrine, but a paracrine kind of hormone. And then intestinal phase, initiated by the acidic chyme. Acidic chyme, that's what the bolus turns into. That's the digested food in the small intestine, and that causes the release of CCK, cholecystokinin, which stimulates the release of bile, which starts to break up. It emulsifies large fat globules so that the pancreatic digestive enzymes, pancreatic lipase, can more effectively continue the digestion of fats. Carbohydrates, digestion starts in the mouth. Proteins start in the stomach. Lipids, not until the duodenum, when it meets the bile and starts to emulsify. You need to know what peristalsis is, those rhythmical contractions of the visceral muscle, circular and longitudinal layers in the intestines that moves that chyme along. And you need to be aware of the three structural, more anatomy than physiology, but okay, they go together. They're inseparable, A and P are. At least that's what I would argue. And there are three structural characteristics of the small intestine. Villi, finger-like folds in the mucosa, and simple columnar cells that have the cellular membrane modification of microvilli. And then there are circular folds in the small intestine. All three of those work together to dramatically, radically increase the surface area of the mucosa lining the small intestine. And that increased surface area really facilitates more effective, efficient absorption of those digested nutrients, carbs, proteins, and lipids. So that's the digestive system. Makes me hungry. How about you? Until next time, Krause out.